Welcome back. In this video, we'll be discussing the first of the three parts of the essay, the introduction. We'll spend some time talking about the purpose of the introduction overall, as well as the three parts that make up the introduction. Before talking specifically about the introduction, I'd like to review briefly the overall structure of an essay. We've covered previously that an essay is composed of three different parts, those being the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. Each of these three parts is equally important. The introduction introduces the topic, the body elaborates on and provides supporting details about the topic, and the conclusion provides an essential takeaway or lesson about the topic. In other words, the conclusion answers the important "so what" question. If even one of these sections is lacking or somehow deficient, the entire essay suffers. So the writer of an effective essay would do well to understand why each of the three parts exists, as well as how to maximize each component's effectiveness in order to, again, communicate to the audience as efficiently as possible. So the introduction obviously has a very simple purpose, which is to introduce the topic that the essay will be about. I like to think of the introduction and liken it to a scenario in which you may be meeting someone new for the first time. Typically, anyone we meet knows next to nothing about us. So it's important that instead of immediately jumping into a long discourse about our life, about our various experiences, we have to start more generally. We have to introduce ourselves. We have to make the other person comfortable around us before we can start sharing more intimate details. The introduction essentially serves this purpose with the essay. Imagine that the essay is you communicating to someone you've never met before and who has very little knowledge about who you are and what you're interested in. You don't immediately jump into these specific details, but rather ease the reader in this case, the audience, into the thing that you want to talk about by speaking in general and then becoming more and more specific as the conversation goes on. So the introduction, rather than being very specific, is actually a fairly general, brief preamble to what the actual essay will be about. So this is really critical. We're introducing the topic and we're making sure that we're not being too difficult or too vague or too opaque when we're introducing the topic. Another purpose of the introduction, which is not immediately obvious, is to engage the reader's attention. Remember always that an essay, despite its level of detail, is trying to communicate something to the reader. If the reader at any moment is disengaged by the essay has failed in its task to communicate to the reader. The introduction is the first thing that a reader will see of an essay. Naturally, this means that the introduction bears the strongest burden of capturing the reader's attention and ensuring that the reader will actually read the rest of the essay instead of stopping midway. So, beyond just introducing the topic, the introduction has to be interesting. The introduction has to create a relationship between the reader and the essay itself. In some cases, this might mean using certain strategies like rhetorical questions or figurative language, such as imagery. Various tricks of the trade, we like to call them, to make sure that the reader is engaged and will come for, in some cases, a more sensational strategy and then stay for the meatier content of the body and the conclusion. So how do we do this? How do we introduce the topic while at the same time engaging the reader's attention? The introduction, similar to the essay, is composed of three parts. These parts are known briefly as the hook, the bridge, and the thesis statement. I don't particularly like to use hook, bridge. I think that these are fairly elementary, but we'll use them for the moment because they are familiar to many students. We can think of the hook as something of a general topic statement. We get to give the bridge named such because it is connecting the general hook to the specific thesis statement, as a space in which to put supporting details and or context. So for example, let's assume that I'm talking about World War II. My hook would be some kind of general topic statement that introduces World War II, while at the same time making some kind of connection to the audience. I would then use the bridge or the context of my introduction to provide some additional details without getting too specific about World War II. And then my thesis statement is where I would get most specific, and it's where I would forward the main thrust or point of what I want my essay to be about. The structure of an introduction should therefore be kind of like an upside down triangle. We start fairly general, and then we become increasingly specific as the essay progresses. So we start general in the beginning, and then by the time we reach the thesis statement, we should be very specific. Remember that the thesis statement serves as the direction or guiding principle of your essay. You can think of it as the map. If the thesis statement is unclear, then the reader has no clear direction of where the essay is going to go. And so the reader is going into the essay relatively blind. Imagine trying to navigate a forest without a map. You would look for landmarks, but more than likely, you'd probably get lost, get frustrated, and you would wander for an extended period of time without making any real progress. An essay without a clear thesis statement, and therefore a clear, strong introduction, is going to have the same issue. Without that direction and guidance, the reader will wander aimlessly, not really sure what to make of your essay, and by the end of it, not really sure what to take away. So this brings us back to that other point. If our introduction is lacking, even if the reader continues to persist in reading, gets through the body, gets to the conclusion, because there was not a strong beginning and a strong hook, the reader has either lost interest, disengaged, and or lacked the necessary guidance and direction to make sense of the content of the essay, and thus leave with the important takeaway that you're trying to communicate in the conclusion. This can apply even to a relatively simple essay. So imagine in an essay that is more complicated, something related to literature, philosophy, history. Without that strong guidance that comes with the introduction, the reader is going to be increasingly lost, frustrated, and with each second that passes and that frustration grows, the reader will be less likely to pay attention to your essay and even attempt to understand what you're trying to say. So we've established that the introduction of an essay must have some kind of hook. Again, think of a hook for catching fish to engage the reader's attention. The introduction then must provide some kind of supporting details to lead the reader from that general introduction, that general introductory statement, to a more specific thesis statement. And then the thesis statement allows for the reader to have a clear sense of direction and guidance for the rest of the essay. To reference that original metaphor I used, imagine that you are learning about a new person, someone new that you have just met. Again, you wouldn't immediately jump into discussing your entire life story, but you would rather provide some general statements about yourself to allow the other person to get a feeling for who you are and a sense of what your interests are. And then, provided that both of you are on the same page and that there is this rapport and relationship established, that other person will be willing to hear you out as you discuss your life and the more specific details about who you are and what you've experienced. The introduction is really critical to get right when writing an essay. And it's not atypical to, during the revision process, go back into the introduction, fix the thesis statement, and even rework the context and even the hook as the rest of the essay is being written. Keep in mind that writing is recursive, not linear. So if I'm working on an introduction first, and then ultimately move through the rest of the essay, I may have to go back to my introduction to revise it to make sure that my introduction is aligning with my body and my conclusion. Above all, I want to make sure that my introduction establishes that really clear, specific thesis statement, which again is the ultimate thrust of my essay. And I want to make sure that my body and my conclusion are reinforcing that thrust. If they're not, again, my essay is not quite fulfilling its task, and I am losing my reader and potentially wasting his or her own time as well as my own. Well, I hope that this video provided some insight into the parts and purpose of the introduction. Again, the introduction is really critical to get, so I hope that this has given you some more insight and some more understanding of why the introduction exists, what it's meant to achieve in terms of the essay as a whole, as well as what its various constituent parts are. As we proceed through these various videos, I'll be showing you ways to craft an effective introduction, especially for the different genres of essays, some of which include expository and persuasive. Regardless of the genre of essay, the introduction will always have the same overall purpose: introducing the topic and engaging the reader's attention and ensuring that he or she has clear guidance for the rest of the essay. Thank you for your time. I will see you in the next video.